It began like any other morning. I woke up to the smell of warm bread from the kitchen. The housemaid was already setting the table. Birds chirped in the garden. The mansion, as always, was peaceful. But something felt off. A quietness that wasn't peaceful. It was too still. Too slow. Like time itself was unsure whether to move forward. I stepped out of my room and noticed that her door was still closed. That was strange. Madame Veronica was always awake before me. She would usually be dressed, seated at the dining table with her file open and tea half sipped. Today there was no tea, no file, no footsteps. I knocked gently on her door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I pushed the door slowly. And what I saw will live in my heart forever. She was lying in bed, dressed in her usual deep blue nightgown. Her scarf had slipped halfway off her head. One hand was on her chest. The other rested beside her. Her eyes were closed. Her chest rose, then fell. But it didn't rise again. I rushed to her. "Ma!" shouted. No response. I touched her hand. Cold. Not the kind of cold from air conditioning. Not the kind of cold from fever. The kind of cold that doesn't go away. I shook her gently. "Ma, please wake up." Nothing. I pressed my head to her chest. No heartbeat. Just silence. Final deep silence. I don't know how long I sat there. I don't know when the tears started. All I know is that my world cracked open. Not because I lost a wife. Not because I lost a teacher. But because I lost the only person who looked at me and saw possibility. The housemaid screamed when she found me. The guards rushed in. The driver stood frozen. Everyone moved like broken clocks. They called the doctor. He came, checked, and said the words I refused to hear. She died in her sleep. Peacefully. Peacefully. What's peaceful about disappearing? What's peaceful about leaving everything behind? What's peaceful about a silence that answers no questions? I sat by her bed as they carried her out. They wrapped her in a white cloth. I stared at the cloth like it could move. Like she'd sit up and scold us for panicking. But she didn't move. She was gone. That night the house was heavy. The staff cried in corners. The air felt like a wall pressing on our chests. No. I couldn't breathe. I sat alone in the study, staring at the chair she used to sit in. The chair was empty. But I saw her there, smiling, nodding, correcting me, encouraging me. And I broke. I cried like I hadn't cried since my mother died. I cried like a boy again. 'Cause no matter how old you get, losing someone who believed in you makes you feel like a child. The next day the lawyer arrived. Mr. Ao. He was quiet, more gentle than usual. He held a briefcase close to his chest like it carried her spirit. "I'm sorry, Daimeji," he said. "She prepared for this. She knew you would need strength." He handed me a folder. Opened it. On the first page, in her handwriting, it read, "If you're reading this, I am gone. But my voice remains." I couldn't read further at that moment. I placed the folder on the table and stared at it like it would open itself. The burial was set for the following Saturday. And it was like the entire region stopped. People came from far and near. Shop owners, landowners, community leaders, orphans she sponsored, staff from her old Lagos boutiques, women she mentored in business, even those who once envied her. They all came. And they all came because they respected her. Because even if they didn't love her, they couldn't ignore her. She had become a tree that gave many people shade. On the day of the burial, I stood in front of her casket. A white box with gold edges, surrounded by flowers. I wore a simple black outfit. No gold. No designer shoes. Because she once told me, "Let the life you lived speak louder than the clothes you wear when you die." I looked at the crowd. Hundreds of eyes. All on me. Waiting for the boy who once married her for survival to speak. And I did. My voice shook at first. But then I remembered her saying, "Speak like you're already what you're becoming." So I did. I told them about the day I first met her. The fear. The shame. The hunger. I told them how she trained me. How she gave me work, not pity. How she gave me discipline, not comfort. How she gave me purpose, not a promise. I told them she never asked for love, but gave me more of it than anyone ever had. And then I said, she didn't just change my life. She gave me the tools to change the lives of others. That is who Madame Veronica was. And that is who she'll always be. Not just in memory, but in legacy. The crowd was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole place erupted. Not with noise, but with honor. After the burial, people came to shake my hand. Your speech touched me. She raised you well. You are a good man. You must continue what she started. Each word felt like a stone on my chest. Not in pain, but in responsibility. That night, I returned to the house alone. The mansion was quiet again. But this time it wasn't empty. Because her presence remained in every corner. In the office. In the garden. In the staff she empowered. In the files she left behind. Me. I finally opened the rest of the letter she wrote. In it she said, you were the son I didn't birth, the student I didn't expect, and the partner I didn't plan for. But you became my greatest investment. Carry my name with dignity. And don't forget to smile when the world claps. Because the boy who once had nothing, now holds everything that matters. I folded the letter. Placed it in the same box where she kept Michael's. And I whispered, rest now, Ma. I'll carry everything you gave me. It wasn't until the 7th day after her burial that I opened the red diary. She had left it in the drawer of the study table with a yellow sticky note on it that read, to Daimeji, read this when the house gets quiet. And the house had become very quiet. The visitors had left. The condolences had stopped coming in. The housemaid returned to her duties, but her voice was softer now. The guards barely spoke. The garden hadn't been touched in days. The silence was thick and lonely. So I sat in the study, opened the diary gently, and began to read the final words of the woman who had saved me from drowning. Entry 1. The day I met Daimeji, I saw his pain before he opened his mouth. There was a kind of hunger in his eyes that wasn't just about food. It was the hunger of a boy who wanted to be seen. A boy who didn't want to vanish like smoke. I knew I had found someone worth fighting for. Entry 2. People will never understand why I married him. But that's the problem with the world. They judge things they've never lived. I didn't marry him to own him. I married him to give him freedom. I married him because I saw a future that needed to be passed on. And he was ready to carry it. Entry 5. He reminds me of Michael. Not in face but in soul. But unlike Michael, Daimeji stays. Even when it's hard. Even when I push. Even when the silence gets loud. He stays. Entry 9. He asked me why I never call him husband. I wanted to say I was scared. Scared to need him. Scared to hope again. Scared that if I gave him my full heart, he'd walk away like the rest. But he didn't walk away. So now, I whisper it in my mind when he isn't listening. My husband. Pause. My chest rose and fell slowly. Then I turned the page. Entry 13. Tonight, I watched him in the garden talking to one of the staff. He was teaching her how to open a savings account. Smiled. Not because of what he was doing but because of who he was becoming. Leader. A giver. A man who doesn't know yet how deeply he's changing the world around him. Entry 14. There are nights when I sit alone and wonder how this all happened. How a boy walked into my gate and rearranged the furniture of my soul. He didn't bring flowers or sweet words. He brought truth, quiet strength, humble fire. The kind of love that doesn't shout but stays. I shut the book gently and held it to my chest. Her words felt alive. Like she was sitting beside me, whispering secrets into my ear. And that night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was sad, but because I remembered. The last night I saw her alive. She told me everything. It was 3 nights before she died. I had just finished reviewing reports in the study and was about to head to my room when she called out softly from the hallway. Daimeji. Turned. She stood by the stairs in her wine-colored wrapper, her hair wrapped neatly. "Come and sit with me." We went to the garden. It was dark, but the moon was bright. She sat slowly on the wooden bench under the almond tree and patted the space beside her. We didn't speak for a while. The wind moved gently. Then she asked, "Do you believe in signs?" "Signs? Yes," she said. "When the world tries to tell you something before it happens." I thought for a moment. I believe in whispers." She smiled. "That's a good answer." She looked up at the sky. "Do you know why I chose you?" I shook my head. She said, "Because you had nothing and yet, you gave everything." I was quiet. She continued, "You didn't come here to pretend. You came with your truth. You didn't try to impress me. You just stayed honest." She turned to me, her eyes gentle. "I've had many people try to take from me. But you were the first to carry something for me." "What did I carry?" I asked. She smiled. "My trust." Then she took my hand in hers. Surprised me. We rarely touched. Her palm was warm, strong. "Daimeji, there are things I need you to know." I nodded, holding my breath. "If anything happens to me, everything I own belongs to you. Not just the shops, or the land, but the responsibility. People, their dreams, their families. You must protect them." "I will," I said. She squeezed my hand. "I've written letters. Given instructions to Mr. Ao. You will not be alone." "I know." I paused. "I'm not scared to die," she said softly. "I'm just scared to be forgotten." I turned to her fully. "Madam, no one could ever forget you." She laughed lightly. "You always say the right thing. I only say the truth." She smiled. Then she whispered, "Daimeji." "Yes." She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "Thank you for loving me, even when I didn't know how to show it back." We sat there for a long time. The moon above, her head on my shoulder, her hand in mine. And I didn't know it then. But that was our final moment. Our last conversation. Our goodbye in silence. So when I closed the red diary that night and lay in bed, I wasn't just remembering her. I was hearing her voice again, telling me what I had forgotten in my grief. That I had been more than her student, more than her husband, more than her project. I had become her peace. It had been 3 weeks since Madame Veronica was buried. The days were quiet, filled with paperwork and visitors who came to pay their last respects late. The nights were quieter. Just me, the ticking clock, and the voice of memory whispering through the halls. But life didn't stop. Because she had prepared me for this. And slowly, I started stepping into her shoes. The first Monday after the mourning period ended, I visited our newest store location, our third branch, which had just started construction in Abeokuta. When I arrived, the workers stopped and greeted me with wide eyes. They used to call me Olga Veronica's boy. Now they said, "Good morning, sir." I walked through the half-finished structure, inspecting the walls, the shelves, the ceiling. The supervisor followed closely, answering every question I asked. And when I gave suggestions, they took notes. Not because I shouted, not because I was rich, but because now my voice carried the weight of her name. I returned to the mansion late in the evening. The housemaid served jollof rice and grilled fish. I ate quietly, then went to the study. There was a new file on the table. It was from Mr. Ao. Inside was a document titled, "Transfer of Ownership." My eyes scanned the pages. One line stopped me cold. "All physical properties, investments and estate assets are hereby transferred to Mr. Daimeji Afolabi Adekunle as sole heir and executor." I didn't move. I just stared at it. The room felt heavy again. Not with sadness, but with something deeper. Responsibility. I signed the document slowly, hand trembling slightly. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I wanted to honor the moment. When I finished, I closed the file, stood up, and went to the front balcony to breathe. And that's when I saw it. The gate. The same tall black iron gate I had walked through the first day, as a hungry, hopeless boy who didn't know where else to turn. There was something different on it now. A new gold plaque. Shiny, fresh, beautifully carved. I walked closer, and when I got there I saw it clearly. The Veronica and Daimeji Legacy House. Name. Beside hers. On the same gate. Touched it. Ran my fingers over the letters. Daimeji. Not as a visitor. Not as a servant. Not even as a student. But as a co-builder of something that would outlive us both. Tears gathered in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I smiled instead. Because I remembered something she once said. When your name is carved in iron, let your heart be carved in humility. The next morning I called a staff meeting. All the workers in her businesses, managers, drivers, cleaners, marketers, guards, gathered in the event hall behind the mansion. They sat in rows, whispering quietly. Then I stepped forward and spoke. Madam is gone, I said. Everyone bowed their heads. But she left us a house, a name, a mission. Pause. This is no longer just her legacy. It is ours now. All of us. People looked up. I continued. She didn't just build shops. She built people. And I plan to continue that. I looked across the room. Women. Some older than me. Some younger. All waiting. All hoping. All salaries will remain the same. Bonuses will come. But I also want more. They leaned in. I want loyalty. I want truth. I want the fire she lit in us to keep burning. Then I said what I had never said before. My name is Daimeji Afolabi Adekunle. I was her husband. I am now your leader. And I will not fail her. The room clapped. Slowly at first. Then louder. Then they stood. And I stood taller. Later that day, I visited her grave. It was behind the mansion, under a tree she once planted with her own hands. There was no noise, no crowd. Just me, the wind, and the name carved into the headstone. Veronica Oladuni Agbaje. She bloomed quietly but shook the earth. He knelt and whispered, Your name is on the stone. Mine is on the gate. We are one now. The next few days moved fast. Meetings, bills, letters, interviews. Her story began to spread. And in every interview, every article, they didn't just say, Wife of Veronica. They said, Co-founder of the Veronica and Daimeji Legacy. And slowly, I stopped hiding in her shadow. Not because her shadow wasn't safe, but because she had trained me to shine. One evening, I sat in the garden with Sod. She was older now. Taller, sharper, her school uniform clean and crisp. She sipped her malt and asked, Brother Daimeji, do you think she sees us? He nodded. She always had eyes bigger than this world. Bud smiled. I want to be like her. I looked at her. You will be. But you'll also be better. Because now, we have the chance to teach others. That night I walked back to the gate one more time. Touched the plaque. And whispered. We made it, Mama. We made it. It was the kind of day that looked perfect on the outside. The sun was out, not too hot. The wind danced gently with the trees. The scent of freshly trimmed grass filled the mansion compound. Even the birds seemed to sing sweeter that morning. But deep inside me, something didn't feel right. I thought maybe it was just exhaustion. After all, I had been working harder than ever. Managing 2 shops. Supervising the 3rd construction site in Abeokuta, overseeing payroll, donations, training sessions, and speaking at community youth events. I had stepped fully into the legacy. But that morning, something about the air felt different, like the silence before a storm. After breakfast, Mr. Ao called. Good morning, Daimeji, he said in his calm, usual tone. Good morning, sir. I need to deliver something to you today. Are you at home? Yes, I replied. I'll be there by noon. He hung up. I didn't think much of it. He had been handling estate documents for weeks now. Maybe it was just another land paper or business license. But it wasn't. At exactly 12:02 p.m., he arrived in his black car. I welcomed him into the sitting room and offered him water. He declined politely. Then he opened his briefcase and pulled out a sealed box. Wooden, polished, small enough to fit in my hands. "What's this?" I asked. He placed it on the table carefully. "It's her final gift to you," he said. "She instructed me to give it to you exactly 1 month after her burial. Not before. Not after." I stared at the box. My heart began to beat faster. "What's inside?" I whispered. "I don't know," he replied. "Only she did." He stood. "I'll leave you to it." And just like that he was gone. I sat alone in the sitting room. The box in front of me had no lock, no key. Just my name engraved on the top. Daimeji. I reached out slowly and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in soft red cloth, were 3 things. 1. A gold wristwatch. 2. A folded letter. 3. A small photograph. I took the letter first, opened it, and began to read. "My dear Daimeji, if you're reading this, then I am no longer beside you. But I am still with you. In every step, every breath, every brave decision you make. This box holds 3 pieces of me. 1 for your time, 1 for your truth, and 1 for your memory. The watch belonged to my father. He gave it to me when I opened my first boutique. He said, 'Let time work for you, not against you.' I wore it every day for 20 years, then locked it away. Now it's yours. Let it remind you that your time has come. The letter you're reading is my truth, my last truth to you. And I need you to believe every word. I knew from the first week that I was falling sick. The doctors told me it was my heart. I didn't want you to know. Not yet. I wanted to give you something more than pain. So I hurried, taught you faster, gave you more control, showed you the paths I had walked. Because I didn't have years. I only had weeks. But even in those weeks, I lived more than I had in years. Because of you. You made me laugh. You made me hope. You made me believe in people again. And now, I need you to keep believing. In yourself. In this house. In the fire I planted inside you. Don't stop. Don't shrink. Don't let their whispers become your truth. And lastly, thank you for staying when you could have walked away. Love. Veronica." By the time I finished reading, the letter was wet with my tears. I held it to my chest, knelt on the floor, and cried until the pain sat still beside me like a quiet friend. Then I picked up the photograph. It was an old picture. Faded, but beautiful. It showed her, maybe 20 years younger, smiling, holding the wristwatch in one hand, and a small child in the other. The child wasn't Michael. The child looked like me. Same wide nose. Same round eyes. Same tiny gap between the teeth. But it wasn't me. On the back she had written, "A dream. I always imagined I would raise someone like you. I didn't know God would send the real thing." I placed the photo on the shelf beside her business awards. I tied the watch on my wrist. It was loose at first, but I tightened it. And then I stood up slowly. As if something had shifted inside me. Something painful, but powerful. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked to the garden and sat under the almond tree. I watched the moon rise. I whispered her name. Veronica. The breeze rustled the leaves. And I knew. She was not gone. She was here. In the roots of the tree. In the gold on my wrist. In the gate that now bore our names. In the tears that now fell without shame. The next morning I gathered the staff in the dining hall. I stood before them wearing the gold watch. I looked at each one of them and said, "From today we don't just run businesses. We build people." They nodded. And I could see something rise in their eyes. Something I once saw in mine. Fire. But in my room when I was alone again, I sat on the floor, holding the empty box. And I whispered, "You broke me with this last gift. 'Cause you didn't just leave me with your name. You left me with your heart. The weight of legacy is not loud. It doesn't come crashing down with thunder or lightning. It sits silently on your shoulders. Like a wet cloth. Heavy. Constant. Always there. After Madame Veronica's death, that was how I carried her name. Not with pride at first. but with a quiet fear. Because while the world now saw me as the young man who inherited an empire, only I knew the truth. I never asked for any of this. I didn't dream of wealth or houses or fame. All I ever wanted was food on the table, school fees paid, and my siblings smiling again. But now I had 5 properties under my name, staff that looked to me for direction, business leaders seeking my opinion, and a community calling me sir. And I still didn't feel ready. Because legacies are not decorations. They are mirrors. They show you everything, your strength, your weakness, your fears. And they ask, now that you've been chosen, what will you do? I started small. I returned to her routines. Early morning walks in the garden. Office check-ins by 8 a.m. sharp. File reviews. Payroll audits. Supplier meetings. But I didn't just follow her footsteps. I began to take new ones. I expanded the delivery unit of the almond market. I opened a small youth employment center beside the second branch. I created a free weekend class for young boys and girls to learn how to write CVs, run small savings, and dream beyond survival. I used her money, but I used my fire. And every night, I sat by her picture in the study and said, I hope this is the legacy you meant. But as things grew, so did the pressure. Some days I didn't sleep. Some nights I cried in secret. And one Friday morning, I collapsed in the store office after working 3 days without rest. The doctor said, stress, exhaustion. Your body is begging you to stop. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. I asked the room, did she go through this too? Did she ever feel alone with the weight? Then I heard her voice in memory. Sometimes the crown is quiet, but it still presses. Called Sod the next day. She picked up, cheerful as always. Brother Daimeji. Guess what? I won a writing competition. Smiled. That's amazing. They said my story was the most real. I wrote about you and how you became a helper to someone who once helped you. My throat tightened. You're becoming a writer now. Yes, she said proudly. I want to tell stories that heal people. I laughed. You already are. Then she added quietly, I want to help you carry it. The legacy. One day. And that was the first time I saw it. Legacy doesn't end with you. Flows. Passes on. That Sunday, I went to the land Madame Veronica had once called the land of her last dream. It was just a wide open space back then, filled with weeds and scattered blocks. But she once told me, if I had more time, I would build a home for abandoned women. Those the world threw away. So I stood there, the soil still rough, the sun hot, the wind strong. And I whispered, we'll build it. In your name. I called it the Veronica Shelter. A home for widows, abandoned mothers, teenage girls thrown out of their homes. Started with just 4 rooms. Then grew to 10. Then 20. Within 6 months, we had over 50 women under our care. We fed them, trained them, empowered them. And slowly they bloomed. Quietly. Like she once told me flowers do. At the opening ceremony, the mayor came. He asked me to speak. I walked to the podium, took a deep breath and said, I didn't build this shelter because I'm strong. I built it because someone once gave me strength. She gave me her name, her hands, her time. And now I give them back to the world. The crowd stood and clapped. But I didn't smile for them. I looked up at the sky and smiled for her. Because this moment was what she meant when she said, let the life you build speak louder than your voice. After that day, something changed in me. I stopped trying to escape her shadow. Because I realized I was never meant to escape it. I was meant to walk with it, beside it, carry it until it became light, until it became mine. Sometimes when people interviewed me, they asked, how did you know she would choose you? And I always gave the same answer. She didn't choose me because I was ready. She chose me because I was willing. I didn't ask for this legacy. But now I carry it like breath. And maybe that's what legacy really is. Not something we chase. Not something we earn. But something we inherit when someone who carried fire sees a flame in us, and gives us their torch.